Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Mark DeJesus here. I am your brother from another mother, bringing you insights for your healing and freedom journey and navigating this journey in the life of the heart and seeing us grow in mental, emotional, and relationship health. Today, what I want to get into is an important understanding when it comes to our mental health healing journey and our emotions and our relationships. This is the challenging area. The most challenging aspect that I see in interacting with people in one-on-one sessions, in the emails that I get, in the questions that come to me, the interactions that I have with people, and even walking my own journey, this is the toughest area of relationship. Now, when I talk about our healing journey, the restoration's happening in 3 levels. It's happening in our relationship with God, ourselves, and others. I want to share with you where it gets the most challenging from what I see on a regular basis. Now, certainly, everything starts with our relationship with God, learning to receive His love, learning how to interact with Him in His love, learning how to relate to God and who He really is versus distortions we've been taught, and that goes down a whole bunch of different avenues. We can certainly talk about our relationship with other people, right? Starts with mom and dad. It starts with our upbringing, our relationship with people, how we relate to the world around us. Certainly, that becomes a challenging aspect that we're learning to heal. And we certainly want to learn how to relate in new ways in all 3 areas. But where I find the challenge really rising up is right here, is how you relate to you. Now, many of you growing up, I know this is true for me, we didn't even realize that we had a relationship with ourselves. We didn't understand that concept, right? But yet, you live with yourself, you talk to yourself, you have thoughts that you pay attention to, you have ways you interpret what you're going through, you have interaction and dialogue going on constantly all throughout the day. The problem is that most of us are recognizing the vast majority of what's going on within us is not helping us heal, it's actually dividing us from ourselves. One of the biggest things that happens that requires healing is the shattering that takes place here. We become divided in ourselves, and a house divided against itself cannot stand. So we start to develop what is often called an inner critic. And this inner critic becomes a way of relating, because the inner critic, it infects how we feel we relate to God. It also then stems in how we relate to other people. When an inner critic is driving thoughts and it becomes the most predominant voice in your life, it really hinders how you do relationships. It destroys marriages, it destroys parenting, it destroys friendships. And it's not so much how toxic they are, all right? Now, people can be toxic. I talk about that a lot. But let's put that aside for a second. When you're carrying an internal world within yourself, what you bring to relationships is already hot with anger and intensity and disturbance that we bring to relationship. And we're trying to talk to God, and we're trying to work through issues, and we're bringing this ruptured ball of contempt and this inferno that's going on within us, right? And we feel disconnected to God. So this sense of self is an aspect that many people get confused over, because it's like, what does the healing process look? Should we be absorbed with ourselves? And many people say, well, that's selfish to even think about yourself, or even the concept of self-love. That's self-consumed. It shows us already how distorted we are about how we should see ourselves and how we should even relate to ourselves, because the journey is actually learning to see ourselves the way that God sees us, which then improves relationships. It enhances mental health. It heals us. It matures us, right? But what happens out of so much of the pain and emptiness and neglect that we've experienced in our life, and the erosion it has on our mental health, there becomes a domino effect of enemies that rise up. And I talk about this in my book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself. This was a game-changing subject in my journey. If you want to track my journey and what has revolutionized my life. Number one is recognizing the love of the Father, but number two is recognizing how to relate to myself in a healthy way, because I realized I had a terrible relationship, a relationship filled with animosity towards myself. The first thing that happens when brokenness is in our life is the effect of shame. And when we have a divided relationship with ourselves, and we see ourselves and we become an enemy to ourselves, shame comes into the picture, and it creates a sense of glasses by which you now see everything. And when shame comes into play, it certainly ties into fear. It welcomes fear, and we become very apprehensive. We become very hypervigilant. We become guarded now. We become guarded to the world. We become guarded to God because we have a punishment-based relationship with God. We are anxiously afraid of God. And really, we're in a world of fear within ourselves. So shame distorts the whole picture. Once this starts, it's a domino effect. We're already adding struggle to struggle. Shame comes in and looks at what you battle and now beats you up for having the battle. So now you have two problems. You have whatever you're struggling with, and now you have shame over it. So now it becomes a double-barrel shotgun that's hitting at you. And that's why in my work with people, the first thing we have to start clearing out is the effect of shame. Because shame causes us to hide in fear. It causes us to avoid, to withdraw. We become afraid of God. We become afraid of others. We become afraid of ourselves. We become even afraid of what we think we could even handle. We become afraid of even freedom. We become like Adam and Eve, just hiding in the bushes with trying to cover ourselves. And so I've done a whole series on shame. But the thing that I want to bring out is that the damage this creates is in a lens, and it really magnifies fear. And so now, because shame and fear are at work, love and grace get hindered in the full effect that they need to have. Because grace is a solution to shame. Grace invites us into what Jesus did for us. It helps us lean into the covenant perspective of how God sees us in our battles. When grace comes in, grace invites us into mercy. Mercy is God's compassion on us in our sin, in our struggles, in our bondage, in our battles, in our weakness, in our goofiness, and all that stuff. It's God's mercy where He's compassionate towards us in that. Grace points us to what Christ did, and it empowers us. It adds power in the midst of our struggle that we don't have to live in this shame. We can break free. Love confronts the fear. It damages fear. It displaces fear. It drives fear out. But the fear and shame cause us to avoid because we experience love relationally with God, relationally with others, relationally in how we interact with ourselves. But the shame and fear combo causes us to avoid ourselves. And what I realized as I learned in my journey is I withdrew from dealing with myself. I avoided myself through perfectionism, obsessiveness, compulsive behavior, performance, constant busyness, trying to do everything right, trying to get all the rules right, trying to present myself to the world in a way that's loving. But I was actually withdrawing love from myself. I was creating a conditional love relationship. So I was constantly disconnected from love. So I developed thinking that was actually self-hate. And self-hate is actually very, very quiet. It's often a very hidden monster that is a theme within our thinking. And it doesn't scream a lot, although it does lash out in anger at times. When you see people with lots of anger issues, that anger is often stemming from self-hate. This flame inferno comes out of the combustion that's going on within of how we see ourselves. Because remember, we're creating a battle here of you. This is self versus self. You're at war within you. And this was a big place of breakthrough for me because I began to realize how I feel about my actual body, my appearance, how I come across, how I try to relate to the world was driven out of this. Self-hate withdraws love. It's because that's really what hatred is. We could talk about hatred as a violent effect, but hatred is really withdrawing. So if I want to be very, very hateful to you in a moment where there's vulnerability, I just walk out of the room and ignore you. Wow, that's painful, isn't it? How many of you in your journey, you walk out of the door on yourself on a regular basis? And what you need is love. And what you need is to actually embrace yourself and look at yourself and see where you are, not in shame and fear and self-hate, but with the embrace of love. But this is challenging when you've lived a life of self-hate. It causes you to withdraw, and now it inflames disconnect. Self-hate keeps this disconnect going in all three areas, but it flames out of how you see yourself. And a lot of our mental health healing journey is letting God heal the disconnect of how we're disconnected to ourselves, how we feel disconnected from God, and how we feel disconnected from others. So as I navigate this process, I realize too there's this aspect that is called self-rejection, where I self-reject. Because my identity is not built on God's love for me. It's now based out of self-hate, shame, and fear. So now when love arrives to me, I don't receive it. Self-hate deflects it back. Self-rejection says, I'm unworthy to receive this. A lot of my OCDers, I'm trying to help them and teach them that they spin out in their relationship with God, but underneath it is this self-rejecting. They constantly are disqualifying themselves. People that have been heavily traumatized, heavily neglected, they become trained to disqualify themselves from the grace of God, the beauty of His love. It seems too good to be true. They're constantly finding a list of things that say, see, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve, so they constantly bounce it back. And then many come in and go, yes, we don't deserve love because we're all sinners. Right? So what I'm not speaking of, the healing of this is not entitlement. I deserve all these things. The answer to this is not entitlement. The answer actually is humility in receiving love. Because this self-rejection creates actually a stubbornness. And when the hug is there, the embrace of heaven is there, we push it back. We say no. I had to actually, when people said loving things to me, wrote loving things to me, I had to actually humbly say thank you and intentionally actually learn to receive it, because my identity had been built on actually rejecting the love that was available. So when we constantly dismiss love, reject love, our identity struggles to receive the higher identity that's available in Christ. Meaning the more than conquerors that you are, that what God has in store for you, the journey, seeing the beauty of your journey, it's disconnected because we're self-rejecting. As you can see, the answer to all this is love and grace. This stuff gets complicated. It gets overwhelming. We can look at this and go, oh, I got to deal with this. I got to read 20 books about this. I got to do, and we get overwhelmed, and really, the steps for healing are not necessarily all easy, but they're simple. Learning to be loved, learning to see ourselves graciously, learning to connect to the beauty of mercy. Because see, the response to those things is gratitude, forgiveness, patience, kindness. Now the fruit of the Spirit starts to flow, where we start to connect to God's nature and how He relates to us. But it took some unwinding for me to discern these things, to recognize these things. Now, I'll tell you the biggest thing that kept all this stuff intact. I didn't see it. My friends saw it, mentor saw it, teacher saw it, but I had to see it. Was all this stuff here that I battled with got reinforced and held and protected by self-pity. Self-pity becomes the quicksand. I've never fallen in quicksand, but I watch videos on it. And it's like the more you move, the more you spin, the worse it gets. Self-pity, because we've been neglected, traumatized, left feeling alone, disconnected from God, disconnected from others. So now we disconnect from ourselves, and we really reinforce this through this false coping mechanism. I have a whole series I did on breaking limitations off of your life, where I talk about victim thinking and self-pity. They become the faulty ways by which we cope. Self-pity says, nobody understands what I'm going through. So we live in a self-loathing where we cycle and at times ruminate, and we stew in the sewage. And so whenever love arrives, self-pity goes, yeah, but look what I've been through. Yeah, but look at what I've experienced. This is one that no one can tell you. So if I was to sit down with you, I would talk to you about shame. I would talk to you about self-hate, self-rejection. This one, though, if I call it out, it's going to trigger a self-response that I don't care. So because I know that, each of us has to come to our own awareness of how self-pity impacts us. Where we get stuck, if you find yourself getting stuck and you're cycling and spinning over the same problem, be aware of self-pity. It is the false coping mechanism. Sometimes people think when I talk about self-love, loving yourself, that I am speaking of feeling sorry for yourself, or victim thinking, or self-loathing. I just hate my life. And but this is a major area of breakthrough. Transformed my journey when I realized I live out of pity. I have a loyalty to my suffering that won't let me leave it. It won't let me connect to gratitude. It won't let me connect to the new. Those who've been severely traumatized, this becomes a real battle. Because remember, you're disconnected with self, so you don't know how to be loving to yourself. This is actually anti-love. So what ends up happening is we get lost in self. Now we're introspectively staring at ourselves, overwhelmed with all the problems, and now we're looking, oh my goodness, Mark is teaching all these things and I have all of them, what am I going to do? And we start panicking, right? But that's not God's response. God's response first is an invitation to relationship. He's saying, come in. That's what love it does. It invites you and brings you in. And then, as Corinthians tells us, he's patient. This is a journey. It'll take as long as it takes. We're on a journey together, and I'm patient towards you in all things. I am long-suffering. I am patient. That is who I am. That is how I interact with you. It is an aspect of love. It demonstrates the fruit of the Spirit. He's also kind. His kindness points us to his goodness. Right? So you see what I'm doing? I'm just writing over right on top of these things, because we could spend years and years and years trying to dissect these things. And it's good to learn. It's good to develop discernment. But what we really need is love. And God's inviting us in, welcoming us in. This is the tula that I talk about, the total unconditional loving acceptance. And God says, come in and connect to me to relationship. But all this stuff pitches a fit. How do I know this? Because this is all my journey. Pitching a fit. All of the neglect, the trauma, the drama, the brokenness. When love arrives, it's uncomfortable. So I go run and hide like Adam and Eve. But he brings an invitation to relationship. He's patient. He's kind. Instead of shame, he's full of grace, because it points us to what his son did on the cross for you and I. And that now sets the stage for his power to happen in our lives. And now in my brokenness, in my weakness, in my struggles, I'm having a rough day, having a rough week, having a rough month, his grace is here available. Go, Mark, I'm with you. Shame says, get out, hide. You're unlovable. You're damaged goods. And his mercy. I talk about God's mercy. It's his compassion towards us in the midst of suffering, sin, and struggle. I thank him for his mercy because right now I got all kinds of issues and goofiness in my life. He sees me with an invitation of love, patience, kindness, grace, and mercy. What's the journey of unlocking all these areas? Actively receiving it, acknowledging it, saying yes to it, and learning to practice it. I have to learn to let go of self-pity and let gratitude and let it open up my eyes that new steps are possible. I have to realize I'm getting lost in myself and I got to pick my head up because the solution of God's love landing in my life is not self-consumed. It's actually letting the waters of love flow out of me in my life and in my journey. So I pray today that God will help you to unlock where you're stuck in yourself, where you're stuck in certain areas, where the eyes of your understanding can open up to see yourself the way that he sees you. If you want to take the next step, get a copy of God Loves Me and I Love Myself. This helped me so much in being able to see what I was going through and where I was at from God's redemptive perspective. I pray this adds heart healing to your life and to your journey. If this was a blessing to your life and to your journey, would you consider a one-time donation or become a monthly supporter? Because those who donate and generously give towards the ministry work help support these broadcasts and help us to continue to provide them. Well, it's awesome to be your brother from another mother. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. I'll be back with more insights and tools for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime, I'm out.